want to recognize, a couple things. Nice that that's been on because that's leading into my next thing. We are recording these sessions. They'll be available to all our attendees on a login page. It'll be on our website. It'll include the video along with the presentations from our speakers, along with their contact information. We're going to try to answer as many questions as possible as far as what you're asking these speakers about. If we can't get to all the questions, we're going to get the answers for those, and they'll be posted on our website as well for each of those week sessions. So there'll be some frequently asked questions that we'll probably have there as well. So we're looking forward to this session and all the other four as well. Right now, I'd like to turn it over to our president of the Wisconsin Rural Partners organization. And Sandy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I want to welcome you to the first session of our Rural Summit. We especially thank UW Extension for serving as our online host during our summit. Steve has already introduced the members of our Summit Planning Committee, and I want to commend them for their significant effort in building the program content for the coming weeks. As Steve has mentioned, we are currently accepting nominations for our annual Top Rural Development Initiative recognition. I believe this is our 21st year of this program. If you have a project or an activity that has made a positive impact on your rural community, we strongly suggest that you submit a nomination. It's not a difficult process, and there's information on our website. Thank you.
Thanks, Sandy. We also, as we mentioned, couldn't do it without our gold sponsors and our silver and bronze sponsors, along with the exhibitors as well. Their financial support has helped us do quite a few things, not just for the summit, but some of our other activities throughout the year as well. And during these 5 weeks, we're going to recognize our gold sponsors and have them say a few words. I don't know, is Jeffrey Tucker, the Vice President of Marshfield Clinic Health System, Business Development and Care Innovation, is he here with us right now? If he is,
I
Jeffrey.
am, Steve.
Okay, Jeffrey, the floor is yours. Great to have you and Marshfield Clinic joining us.
Oh, thank you. I'll be really brief here. Again, I'd like to welcome you to today's Wisconsin Rural Summit presentation. Again, I'm Jeff Tucker. I'm the Vice President of Business Development and Care Innovation for the Marshfield Clinic Health System. We are a largely, I would say predominantly a rural healthcare system. So we see our future and our success tied to the success of rural communities. We are very proud to partner with Wisconsin Rural Partners on rural health initiatives and to sponsor this educational series. So with that, we hope you enjoy today's program, and I'll turn it back over to you, Steve.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. And yeah, Marshfield Clinic has been a great partner of ours, and we look forward to doing a lot of things together in the future as we build healthcare across the state of Wisconsin. Our other gold sponsor that I'd like to introduce is our Mid-State Technical College representative, Heather, who's the manager of continuing education. Heather, if you're here, I would love to hear from you as well.
Yes, thank you, Steve. And I'd like to welcome everyone to this virtual rural summit that we're having today. This really, this type of educational programming is really right up my alley. Mid-State Technical College is really proud to sponsor this event as we have a primarily rural service area as well in our district. We have campuses in Wisconsin Rapids, Marshfield, Stevens Point, and Adams, Wisconsin, and serve all of those surrounding communities. We have academic programming, also customized training to our local businesses and incumbent workforce, as well as lifelong learning in the areas of professional and career development and personal enrichment through our continuing education division. We really strive within our district to be that educational partner of choice. So to continue on that theme of education, we have a number of things coming up in the coming weeks that you might be interested in, including presentations on contemporary American artwork, watercolor painting, where we'll send you a kit and you get to work right along with the instructor. If you're looking for food manager certification, we have that. You can come geocaching with us. We even have a cooking class coming up where we're partnering with a national food media company to provide that. And a class on dandelions. I'm told that I can't forget our class on dandelions since everyone's starting to see those. I'll put a link in the chat if anyone's interested in taking a look at our latest catalog, or certainly send me an email at continuinged@mstc.edu. We would really love to have you join us. Most of our events are being hosted in this exact fashion right now, and certainly looking forward to the future when we can hopefully come back together. But again, welcome everyone, and thank you. We're very happy to be a sponsor for this event.
Thank you, Heather. And yeah, education in the rural areas is a real critical thing in the future, and we really appreciate having Mid-State Technical College join us as well. On our website, if you go to our summit pages, all our sponsors are listed with their logos. You can click on the logos and it'll take them directly to their websites. So it's a one-stop shop for you there as well. But thank to all our sponsors, and we look forward to spending a lot of time working together over this next year as we build our rural communities and areas around the state. Right now, I'm going to give up the screen share, and I'm going to turn it over to the moderator for today's event. It's just a perfect fit for Rebecca with housing. But Rebecca, the floor is yours, and we're really going to enjoy this 2-hour session.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. As Steve mentioned, my name is Rebecca Giroux from WIDA, Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority, and Wisconsin Rural Partners board member. I have the honor of moderating today's session. We again want to thank our wonderful panelists for being with us today, and we're looking forward to their presentations. As our time is limited, we will have a couple minutes after each presenter for a couple of questions, but questions can be typed within the chat, and we'll do our best to answer 1 to 2 questions. And then of course the presenters will be sharing their contact information, either their email or an organizational email where you can reach out after the fact. And as Steve mentioned, we'll be publishing kind of an FAQ and share resources after each session. Before we get into the first hour here, the bios of our panelists, full bios, can be found on the Summit webpage, and a link to our Wisconsin Rural Partners website has been included in the chat. And with that, we'll jump into our first panel, which is Success Stories and Leveraging Your Community for Housing. Our first panelists are Seth Hudson, Director of Economic and Strategic Development at Cedar Corporation, Mariah Good, Director of the Door County Land Use Services Department, and Wally Orzechowski, he is the Executive Director of Southwest CAP. And Seth's going to kick us off this afternoon. So we'll go ahead and let Seth share his presentation. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. Let me get my screen up and running here.
Here we go.
Can someone just let me know that you can see my PowerPoint?
Looks good, Seth.
Perfect. Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for letting me speak to you today. Really quickly, I'm with Cedar Corporation. We're a planning engineering firm covering the state. Basically, we act as extended staff to small rural communities across the state out of our 4 locations. And we do everything from site civil, economic development, TIF, planning, architecture, you name it. We have a lot of different services that we offer our clients. We also work for the private sector as well. So we do a number of development type projects, both housing, industrial, and commercial. And then in our economic development group that I run, we do everything from studies for economic development. We do housing studies, target industry studies, TIF districts, et cetera. And I've come to the table with about 26 years of experience in the world of economic development. So I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about where we are in the marketplace relative to workforce housing. What is it? What are some of its challenges? And then finish up with what are developers looking for and what communities can do to position themselves. So workforce housing. As everything is out there, there is multiple definitions for what it means. The Wisconsin Realtors Association says that workforce housing is the supply of housing in a community. It can be different types, sizes, et cetera, but it's housing that meets the needs of the workforce in that community. The Urban Land Institute says that workforce housing is affordable housing, and that is housing that's affordable to households of 1, 2, 3, 4 or more people earning 60 to 120% of the area median income of that community. And then HUD has a definition of workforce or affordable housing, and that's a household that it can obtain for 30% or less of its gross income housing. And when you talk about 30% or less, out of your monthly check, that needs to cover all the costs associated with that housing. So, those are things such as your mortgage, your real estate taxes, your homeowner's insurance, fees, utilities. So those are kind of give you some thoughts as we go through today about what is workforce housing and what it means to different people, different funding sources, and none of it really lines up 100%, which is part of the challenge. So what's going on in the marketplace? I think a lot of people know this already. There's been a lot of talk, but I'll just cover it high level. We've not built enough homes since the Great Recession. As of the end of 2018, we had 75% fewer lots created, and we had 55% fewer new housing units being constructed. As you can see, let me pull on my laser pointer. As you can see, we had a massive drop during the Great Recession. We were starting to come back up and we dropped again. And then of course, we had COVID impacting lots of development going forward. The other issue we have, specifically in Wisconsin, is if you look at Wisconsin's 20 largest counties, they underproduced between 2006 to 2019 over 20,000 housing units. So there was a demand during that period of time, and those counties did not meet that demand by over 20,000 housing units. So again, we are building ourselves into a situation where demand is outpacing supply, which of course, as we all know from basic economics, means prices go up. So there's been major shifts in the market composition. This is due to the record shortage of existing available homes. Historically, new homes made up one out of 10 available homes on the market. So if you have 10 homes on the market today, I live in Eau Claire, one of those available homes would be new. Today, it's 1 in 4. So as demand has been rising across all the geographies and all segments of the marketplace, but particularly the demand is coming in from the first-time home buyer and the 55 and plus buyer. And what's happening is because there's not those homes for those two ends of the bookshelf, there's pushing that demand in the middle. People are not leaving their homes. They're not either downsizing because they can't afford it or upsizing, and that's causing the squeeze. In addition, we have some market realities that are hitting home. Construction costs are rising faster than inflation. Lumber prices currently are up 67% from last year. Drywall's up 7%. Steel's up 18%. Copper, which is in all your wiring, is up 27%. So we have a shortage of homes and our costs are skyrocketing. And if anyone has bought lumber in the last month or so, like I have, you'll see the sticker shock. There are some studies out there that are saying that just lumber alone in a typical house for a family of 4 is costing that house to go up in value by another $27,000 in cost, just the lumber. We also have things we're dealing with within Wisconsin, outdated land use regulations. We have zoning that's too restrictive, which can obviously lower the supply of housing. It makes the land become more expensive. Some of our ordinances have density requirements that really aren't encouraging higher density, more homes per lot to spread out the cost. Or we have higher parking requirements or things of that nature that are impacting the overall cost to build homes. The other thing is our infrastructure costs. If you're building new in 1998 and you need to put in a 330-foot long street, which is a typical city street, you'd have 3 homes on either side, so 6 homes. It was costing you $185, and that's a typical street with a sidewalk on one side. In 2018, it was $525. And how that hits the housing market. If you're in a community and your minimum lot requirement is 100 feet wide, then to cover that cost, that one unit, that one lot now has to absorb what used to be $9,200 and in 2018 has to absorb $26,000. Now, if you can make that 100-foot wide lot only 50 feet, the cost has gone down. But a lot of our smaller, more rural communities have 100-foot wide lot requirements. And that's an easy low-hanging fruit that communities can do to encourage that housing development and to keep it affordable. So what are housing developers seeking? Housing developers are looking for proof that there is a demand for housing in the market space. And that's through market studies. And that's from coming in and talking to communities. They want to know communities, they're looking for communities that know what they are desire versus what they actually need. So does the community want single family? Do they want multifamily? You know, those types of things. They're looking for reduced or no land costs. And they're looking for help to offset or pay for the infrastructure costs for that new housing development. And it can be in a public-private partnership or something, but they're looking for that reduction in cost. And finally, they're looking for land that's ready to go, properly zoned, no environmental issues, etc. So ways that communities can help facilitate housing development. One, determine the market demand. You know, what are your market drivers? Who's hiring at what salary? And I want to make a comment here. There's been some, I guess, misconceptions or misunderstanding in the marketplace about the difference between a housing study and a market study. A housing study is used to determine what housing needs there are in a community, in a geographic area. And they look at permits that have been pulled, they look at demographics, wages, they look at things, you know, how old is the housing stock, and then kind of what's the demand. You know, are more people looking for 2 bedrooms or 3 bedroom homes? You know, the age of the people looking, et cetera. A market study is specifically to a site based on a performer by a developer. Will the project pencil if it is built? How long do they see to return, et cetera? Housing studies are what are used to help attract developers to a community and understand a community. Market studies is what a housing developer uses to get their funding. And a lot of communities get those confused and think they've done a housing study and that's a market study or vice versa. So I just wanted to share that with everybody. The other thing that communities can do is, as part of that study or part of community research and input, is determine what types of housing you're looking for. Are you looking for single family? Are you looking for multifamily, or is there a mix? Right. What price point the community would like to see that housing at? Now, can you get there? That's a different issue, but at least knowing out of the gate what you're looking for helps then market your community to the developers that are out there looking. Identifying land that is ready to go, setting design standards up front so developers know what they need to meet up front and not through the process. Because keep in mind, they borrow money to build. Time is money. The longer it takes for them to actually put shovels in the ground and then sell units, the more impact it has on their bottom line. Determine what type of incentives you want to offer. And here's another key one: gaining that community support and buy-in for the housing. Not just educating the elected officials, but also the community about the types of homes and why it needs to occur. So really quick, I got like 2 more slides and I'll be done here, I think it is. So what are some communities doing? A lot of communities are taking the first leap in doing and performing their housing studies themselves, and you're using it as a way to educate the elected leaders and the citizens. A number of communities are creating public-private housing funds. Madison has a group that's actually funded by the private sector. Both Wausau and Menominee have created down payment programs where the city and businesses have put money in, and then people can tap the funds to buy a house in that community. Taking the 1-year TIF extension, if you have a TIF district, is highly recommended. That's an easy way to capture value, assuming you are there within your TIF plan. A lot of other communities, Eau Claire, Menominee, a lot of others are actually taking this step forward to identifying the sites and doing the master planning themselves and then going out and finding developers. Updating zoning codes. Waupun is in the process right now of updating their zoning code to allow accessory dwelling units or ADUs. They're changing their ordinances to allow more mixed use projects, allowing smaller lots. Number of villages over in my area are doing that right now. Waiving development fees is pretty popular. City of Prescott just did that. And then a number of communities are taking all this information and creating an RFQ-like process to then go out to developers and say, we've done all this work. These are our sites. Let's talk and see what we can do together to get something developed. So, going forward, this is my last slide, challenges and opportunities. I think for municipalities, it's figuring out what those municipalities want in their community, what they want it to look like over the next 20 years, and then finding the best way to incentivize that development. And the development community has a really great opportunity, and that's figuring out how to get workforce housing done the right way and the right cost point, because this demand's not going away. It's only going to get tighter. It's only going to get more expensive as we move forward. So, and that is it. And I'm going to put my email in the chat box. If you have any questions, feel free to call or reach out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Seth. A lot of great information on what municipalities can do and just kind of a good building block and some ways to get started. So we do have time for questions. So I will read this through, and like Seth said, he'll put his email in the chat. Just for timing's sake, we only have time for 1 or 2 questions per panelist. So a member asked, can you tell us a bit more about development incentives available for developers? It seems that there's significant viability from one municipality to the next. So I'll kind of leave that there and have Seth maybe chime in with some thoughts there.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, if you are doing any type of housing that what I would say is not defined as affordable under federal rules, the only really type of incentive that's out there would be your tax increment financing from a local perspective. And a lot of communities are struggling with that because they might not have a TIF district, they might be TIF'd out, there might be a lot of reasons. That's the best way to help. You're putting in public infrastructure, and frankly, I think it's the easiest for the community to understand, right? You're taking community dollars and you're investing it into public infrastructure. That's pretty standard and pretty common thinking, versus taking my tax dollars and putting it into actually building an apartment building, right? That's a little harder to sell and for people to understand. So when you move from the general idea of workforce housing down to affordable housing, setting it at certain salary levels, et cetera, there is a series of programs out there that can help with that. Low-income housing tax credits, which WIDA runs, and I'm sure they'll talk about that later, is the biggest one, but that's oversubscribed. We were involved with 4 projects this year in 4 rural communities, and not a single one of them got tax credits this year. And we were very close, but there's not enough money to go around. So that's a hard issue to try to figure that out. So I don't know if that answered it 100%, but that's. And I guess the other thing they're saying is there is a lot of what's called stacking the capital, building that capital stack, finding the free land. Maybe you bring TIF in, maybe you bring historic credits in if it's an older building that's being rehabbed, then you bring in housing tax credits, and each one of those is helping to fill a gap to keep your project at a certain price point.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Seth. We really appreciate your time, your insight and knowledge, and appreciate that. And somebody did ask if the slides will be available, and we will make the presentations from today, if there are presentations today, available on the website. So we appreciate that question. So with that, I'll turn it over to our next panelist, Mariah Good.
All right. I want to make sure that everyone can hear me and see my slide. No. Let's see. Can you see the slides now?
Yes, they are starting.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Let's see. All right. So I think all the tech is working, which is usually my biggest problem with this stuff. My name is Mariah Good. For my day job, I'm the director of the Door County Land Use Services Department, so dealing with county planning and zoning. And I'm also a member of the Door County Housing Partnership Board, which is a housing trust nonprofit. So that's the main thing I'm going to be talking about today. I thought I'd start a little bit by just giving you some context for Door County's affordable housing issues and how the housing trust is going to fit in with all of the other things that we've been working on. So the issues in Door County are exactly the same as Seth just laid out. We're not really, in most ways, any different from any other part of Wisconsin or part of the country. But we do have a couple of things that are relatively unique to us that are exacerbating the problems in Door County. The biggest one of which is, or one of the biggest ones, is that we have a huge and hugely dominant second home market and tourism-based industry. So lots of conversion of housing units to short-term rentals, which is really driving up prices in the county and also just pulling housing stock out of the available pool. We're also obviously a peninsula, which has always made it more expensive to do housing construction up here. And as Seth just went through, all the costs are getting worse as time goes on. And we also, since we're a peninsula, it's hard to draw more construction workers. We have a real shortage in the county right now of construction workers. There's only one way in. They're coming up, from the Fox Valley and Green Bay, and that adds a really long commute to their days. The other thing, we've got a lot of other related issues, and the one big thing that I think also makes us different than the rest of the state is that we have consistently been in the last number of years in the top 3 to 5 oldest counties in the state. So we have an aging population, we have declining school enrollments, and all of that means that our labor market is getting smaller as well. So again, going back to the idea that we just don't have enough people to actually work in construction. So some of us have been working on this for a long time. It's hard to believe I've been on some of these committees for more than 20 years, but we've done a lot. We've had a lot of coordination and information sharing, a lot of studies, summits, research projects. We've done a lot of ordinance revision at the county, city, and village level in the last 20 years. And the county is actually looking at some significant overhauls to our ordinance in the next year with regard to housing. And we've had the development community and employers themselves kind of try to step up and address some of these issues because it obviously is affecting them. We've got a couple of different pools of community development block grant funds that Door County folks can draw from if they qualify. We've got the Section 8 voucher program in Door County. We've got our Lakeshore Community Action Program is active in the county, particularly with home buyer education. And we do have an active Habitat chapter as well. They constructed their 43rd home last year. So we do have a lot of activity, and we've had a lot of money also coming in through USDA Rural Development and through Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development Authority over the past 20 years. We've had millions and millions of dollars coming into the community to help people either buy or build or rehabilitate housing units in the county. So we do have a lot of successes that we can point to, but like everywhere, it has not been enough, and we're not keeping up with what's needed. So in the last couple of years, those of us that have been doing this for a really long time are pretty excited about some new things that are happening and some initiative that we think is hopefully really going to help us make further progress in the next handful of years. So we did have a housing study done in 2019 that tried to quantify the shortages in Door County, and we're basically short on everything. We don't have enough senior housing. We don't have enough seasonal housing for our tourism industry. We don't have enough workforce housing. We don't have enough single family. We don't have enough multifamily. We don't have enough ownership. We don't have enough rental. We're short in everything. We've done a lot of educational work and community meetings after that. The housing partnership was getting formed during the time that study was being finished. We right now in Door County are participating. We're the first community to be part of WIDA's Rural Affordable Workforce Housing Pilot Initiative. And so we're hopeful there's going to be some exciting stuff coming out of that. The UW-Madison University project was studying affordable housing sites in Door County, and we're going to be able to distribute those student ideas about affordable housing to the communities to hopefully get their brains thinking more about some of this stuff. And then we've got a lot of new players in the mix as well, over and above who has historically been really active, both either new organizations that have formed in the county or new developments that are actually coming online. We were lucky enough to get WIDA tax credits awarded to a potential project in Sister Bay this year. So we were one of the lucky ones. So how does the housing partnership fit into this, and why do we need another organization if there's already all these groups that are working on housing in Door County? So the housing partnership is a new independent nonprofit, and we're tackling one piece of the puzzle that we felt was missing, and that being making sure that some of the housing that's being created or built or converted is permanently affordable to workforce families. And we are only looking at year-round. We're not looking at seasonal workforce. But if you live in Door County year-round, even if your job is only seasonal, then you would qualify as somebody that the housing partnership would be able to work with. And you'll hear me refer to it as a housing trust. It's built on the National Community Land Trust model, but we already have a nonprofit in Door County called the Land Trust, so we couldn't use that name. So how does the housing trust work, or how is this one going to work? Like Seth said, I mean, what we're all working on is trying to deal with the gap that's between what's affordable to a household and what it actually costs to develop or acquire housing. But again, the piece that the Housing Trust is going to be focusing on that is different is keeping those homes affordable in the long run. So we do that by acquiring or building homes and then setting that home buyer purchase price based on the affordability for the targeted household for that house. So let's say it's a 3-bedroom house, we're going to price it for a 3-person household. Even if the household that ends up buying it is not a 3-person household, it could be, you know, a 1-person or 4-person. But the Housing Trust bridges that gap. So whether that's through grant dollars or private donations or whatever else, we are going to bridge the gap to make sure that that household is purchasing a home that's affordable to them. And going into it, they know that there's a resale formula that's going to be employed when they go to sell the house. So they know that they're going to be limited as to the amount of equity that they can gain in the home, but they've gotten a great deal on the front end of the home, and they've gotten something that's in better shape than they would have been able to afford by far on the open market, if they could have even have found anything on the open market. So that resale formula will let the buyer know when they buy the home how much they're going to be able to sell it for in 2, 5, 10, 20 years. And that next buyer is going to be also a workforce household that home will be affordable to as well. And the way we do this is through retaining ownership of the land. They buy the home, they lease the land from us. They can still treat it obviously like it's their own yard. They can garden, they can landscape, they can do whatever they want to, but we own the land, which gives us the ability to control the subsequent sales. So what have we been doing in the last 2 years? We haven't actually built or bought anything yet, but we're hoping to change that in 2021. It's a lot of work to set up a new nonprofit, and this is really complicated, so we want to make sure that we do it right. So we've been doing a lot of organizational capacity building over and above kind of what you do when you are normally setting up a new nonprofit. And we've also been working on the partnerships that are going to be foundational to our work as we move forward. So municipalities and other housing organizations, et cetera. We have acquired 6 lots so far, and all of them are in Sturgeon Bay, which is our county seat. It's kind of in the bottom southern third of the county. We purchased one, we were gifted 5 others. For the one that we purchased, we're hoping that we are actually going to be building on that lot later this year in partnership with Habitat for Humanity. So that's going to be a nice partnership for our 2 organizations. And then assuming that that all goes well, we're hoping in 2022 to partner with them on 2 additional lots. I want to point out the in-rem foreclosure process by which we acquired those 5 lots through the county and the city. The county took 5 lots a couple of years ago for non-payment property taxes, and the housing partnership and city staff and county staff worked together with the elected officials, and the county administration determined that they could give those lots to a municipality for a public purpose, and affordable housing was deemed to be a public purpose. So the county gifted those lots this year to the city, who owned them for about 2 minutes, and turned around and gifted those to the housing partnership. So we're pretty excited about that. And we're looking at securing some other lots in Northern Door, where our housing studies show that we have even greater need. So we're hoping in the next couple of years that we've got some lots that are across the county. We're also hoping that people are going to start either donating or selling cheaply existing homes to us, because that will obviously be faster and easier, and given construction prices right now, it'll be cheaper than building the homes ourselves. So I think my 10 minutes is up. I'm going to stop there and take any questions. My contact information is on the screen, but I will also go ahead and I can type it in the chat as well. Thank you.
Perfect timing. Thank you so much, Mariah. So we do have a question here. So who finances the sale of the home? So who issues with the trust owning the land?
So that's a good question. We require that the buyer secure their own financing. So the housing trust is not going to be the person, the entity offering the mortgage. So in the case of this first home that we're going to hopefully be building later this year with Habitat, the Door County Habitat, and maybe all habitats, I just don't know because I'm not familiar with other areas, they are the lender as well. So with this first particular family that we're going to be partnering with, they are going to be getting their financing through Habitat for Humanity. But once, when we get to the point of building homes on our own, then the buyer will be required to go and secure their own mortgage. But obviously we're pricing the home for it to be affordable to them. So assuming that they have decent credit and everything else, they should hopefully be able to secure that mortgage.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. And we may have time for one more question. If anyone's typing one into the chat, we'll kind of monitor that for a minute. And as we said, again, if you're just joining us, we will be posting these slides on our website. And then we'll make sure to have Mariah's contact information put in the chat. And you can also see it here on the screen. So if any questions do come up, we can make sure to get those answered for you. And I don't see any coming in. So thank you so much, Mariah. Great information and great work that you guys are doing in Door County. And with that, we'll turn it over to our first session's last panelist, Wally Oraszowski. We'll make sure to get your slides up here and take it away.
Well, thank you. There it is. So the Meadows, it's a farm worker housing project in our part of Wisconsin, primarily dairy farm workers. And let me preface it by saying, this is driven by a change in the farm economy, in that the smaller and the medium farms, which I don't particularly like the reason, but the smaller and medium farms tend to be going away. And what's happening is the larger farms, whether it's locally owned or owned by somebody else outside of Wisconsin, are growing. So the amount of milk that's being produced is about the same or even a little bit more. But those family farms that have been the mainstay of Wisconsin for many years are decreasing in numbers. And that's led to a lot of other issues, but not to talk about that today. But what that means is with those larger dairy farms, they have to hire employees. It's not just family members. And in one part of our area, Darlington in Lafayette County in particular, there's been a significant growth of the larger dairy farms. And so there's becoming more and more of a need for housing for those farm workers. The overwhelming majority of those farm workers are not native born Americans. They're immigrants. In our case, primarily Spanish-speaking immigrants, although in other parts of Wisconsin, they can be coming from someplace else. And so there's a really lack of housing, as we all know, for everybody everywhere, but especially in these smaller communities like Darlington, where the growth of housing has been impacted by all the things that we've been talking about today, so it's leaving not the best quality housing for some of these farm workers and their family members, and also the other piece of it, and why we're doing this project is also to help to maintain that workforce that these larger dairy farms in particular need workers, and if those workers don't have a decent place to live, they're certainly not going to stick around, especially when they have family members joining them, their spouses and their children. They don't want them to be living in substandard housing or unaffordable housing, to put it more directly. So this is some information on it. We're working with SENER. It's a nonprofit multi-state housing development organization. We've worked with them before. It's a very good organization. We've had a lot of success with them. It's 32 units of housing. It may not exactly look like this picture, but it'll be something similar to that. You can see a 14 2-bedroom, 18 3-bedroom, and it's located in the city of Darlington, but just it's actually a little cornfield right on the edge, but it's close to utilities and that type of thing. So we started this project actually about 5 years ago when we were approached by UMOS, which is United Migrant Opportunity Services, telling us that USDA Rural Development actually has funding a special project to encourage farm worker housing. And so so they gave us some money to do a market study. We did our initial market study, which showed that there was a demand for this type of housing in Darlington. That market study has been done over and over again since then, because 5 years ago is lifetime in terms of market studies, but the demand is certainly still there. So we started with, and maybe we can go to the next slide, or at least the third slide if we can. So we started with the next one. There we go. We started with our first effort where we applied for funding through USDA Rural Development. And it took a couple tries over a couple of years, but we were successful in the second year. And it was initially actually $2 million in grant funds and $1 million in low-cost long-term financing. But that was not enough to do the project. So we decided we were also going to try to get low-income housing tax credits through WIDA, which we did, again, a couple tries over a couple of years, which gave us the bulk of the remainder. But of course, that meant that the owners would be the purchasers of those tax credits. So as far as USDA Rural Development was concerned, they would not, we could not use a grant. So that $3 million is now long-term low interest loan on the project. As we move the project along, and by we I mean with our partners at Scenair, we also knew that there was going to be some gap financing, and certainly we like was discussed earlier, we found out that when we did went out for bids for construction, that they were much higher than we had originally thought. By quite a bit actually, and some of that was certainly being driven not exclusively by lumber costs, but other issues as well. All construction is higher now, so we were short a certain amount of money. So we ended up applying for Federal Home Loan Bank of Chicago, their AHP program, and we were successful with that. And that actually works more or less like a grant for $480,000, and then. We also approached the state of Wisconsin, the home program. We've worked with them before to fill up the remainder of the gap. And so they offered another $987,000. That again is financing. It's not a grant, but it's very low interest. It's very long term, and also it's something that we will pay back as the project is able to. There's not a requirement that we have to pay it back as we would be if we were working with a private lender. So that's kind of the capital stack that was talked about earlier, and where the money is going, as you can see on the right. The other piece of the project I would very much like to mention is that my organization, we're an anti-poverty agency. We do a lot of different things, and there's going to be some extra land at the site. So we are in the process of applying for a CDBG home funding, not home funding, but public facility funding, specifically to build another building at the site that would include Head Start primarily. We don't have a good Head Start site in Lafayette County, certainly not one in Darlington. And so we're hoping to get the funding to be able to do that. There would also be some room in that building for a free medical clinic. There's one already operating in Dodgeville that sees a lot of patients from Darlington, and they'd be willing to spend some time at a second site in Darlington. In addition to, we have a WIC program. For those of you who are familiar with it, it's a nutrition program for low-income folks. So we hope to add that as well. So the long-term plan is of course to have the 32 units of housing that's available to farm workers, in our case, primary dairy farm workers and their families. 40% of their household income has to come from farm labor. The spouse can do something else, but at least that to meet the needs of the USDA rural development funding. But also to be able to provide services to those people. As I mentioned, Head Start would be available to those children, and I would assume all, if not, or most, if not all of them, would be eligible for Head Start. But that Head Start is also available to the broader community, not just to the tenants of the housing, but also to be able to provide free medical care for folks who generally don't have insurance or don't have a lot of ability to pay on their own. And as I mentioned, a nutrition program as well. So it's really kind of a combination of providing housing and services all at the same site. I can't say it's been easy or quick. It's very complicated to put something like this together. We couldn't have done it on our own without the partnership of Scenair. But in terms of everything else, being as a service provider, adding those services to the mix, I think is going to be a really nice project when we're done. So I'll kind of keep it short and answer any questions that anybody happens to have. Thank you.
Thank you so much for going over that great project with us, Wally. We do have a couple questions here. One of them is, do the farms help pay for any of these costs?
No, they haven't. We really haven't approached them. We've been able to pull it off using the capital stack that I mentioned. I think it would be awfully nice if the farms themselves would jump in, certainly in the area of maybe providing some additional services. The free clinic also is always looking for additional funds to be able to operate, and Southwest Cap always is. So maybe on the operational level, we're kind of hoping that they would. We know some of the farms have been very cooperative with the free medical clinic in a variety of different ways. So I think they may be willing to provide some support that way. But in terms of the construction itself, no, they haven't put anything in.
All right, thank you. And speaking of the healthcare providers here, we do have a question. How have the healthcare providers partnered with you in working to build the free clinic or childcare portion of the development?
When the free clinic started, it initially was a part of Southwest Cap, and then with our support broke off and became its own nonprofit organization. So we're very closely related to it. In fact, they operate under out of one of our buildings, but it is a separate corporate entity. So we've been very close to them for many years. They have 2 paid employees who are actually employees of Southwest Cap. But everybody else is a volunteer. It gets a lot of support from Upland Hills Hospital, a local hospital, and that type of thing. But that organization primarily relies on donations to pay for the cost that it happens to have. In terms of Head Start, I mean, Southwest Cap has been a Head Start provider for many, many years. So for us operationally, we're already doing it. It's just that we needed a much better location in Darlington to be able to provide those services.
That sounds great. Another question that we have is, what kind of feedback or support have you received from community members, and how has that contributed to this project moving forward?
Yeah, we've had to work very closely with the city of Darlington and their city council and their mayor, and it's been overwhelmingly supportive. I think in communities like Darlington, smaller rural communities, there's this real concern about loss of population. A lot of people are moving out. And so I'm not suggesting there aren't some cultural issues, but having more people moving into Darlington, living in Darlington, and also particularly in the school systems, having more kids in the school systems is generally very well received. It's kind of keeping these communities growing. And I'll also say, because this project is a tax credit project, it does pay property taxes. And so that's also welcome as well. So I have to say, generally, we've had a pretty good welcome and support by the city of Darlington itself and its elected leadership.
That's great to hear. Thank you. And we do have another question, and Mariah and Seth also feel free to chime in on this one. So can the speakers note whether renewable energy is being included in these housing projects in our plans that we discussed today to allow for self-sufficiency, lower energy costs, and preparation for the electrification of vehicles? So great question.
Well, we
Um,
haven't. Go
Oh,
ahead.
go ahead. No, go ahead, then I'll dive in with a bigger comment.
Well, in this project in particular, obviously, we're doing everything to make it as energy efficient as possible. We haven't gotten to the point yet of solar panels, but it's something we seriously to think about as we go down the road with the actual construction.
I think the idea of making sure that the new development is sustainable is important, not only for just the environment, but also it's reducing, everybody's utility costs, right? So that helps there. There is a program out there called PACE Energy that not all the counties have approved yet, and it's slowly working its way across the state. But it's a funding mechanism. It's basically a loan against the improvements one would do on the environmental side. So you have a standard of certain insulation. If you go above that, you can take a credit, that savings in energy, and you can actually, in a sense, monetize it and borrow against it. It's being used in hotels. I'm starting to see it now in multifamily projects as well. But you still have to pay it back. So it's helping fill a gap, but you still got to figure out how to pass those costs on. So it's kind of helping, but so yeah, that's.
For our housing trust homes, obviously for these first couple, we're just partnering with Habitat, and they have kind of their standard construction practices, but it is something that the housing trust is generally interested in doing, and when and where we can possibly make it feasible.
That sounds great. And we do have a comment from Nicole as well, too, that said the farm worker housing project will be certified by the Wisconsin Greenbelt Homes Program. So thank you for that comment, Nicole. And we do have Sridhar, which will be talking about the WIDA housing tax credit and financing. And so there's some pieces to that with self-sufficiency and standards and things like that. So we'll cover in the second session. So again, thank you so much to Wally, Mariah, and Seth for being our first presenters of our virtual summit. A lot of wonderful, fantastic information. We thank you for your time and sharing your expertise with us today. We'll make sure to get those presentations out to the attendees today. They have all provided their email addresses in the chat. So any follow-up questions that you have, they would be happy to answer those. And we'll again be compiling as best as we can, maybe some FAQs for this session. So with that, we're a little ahead of schedule. So great job to everybody. We will head into a quick break. So stretch your legs, get something to drink, grab a snack, and we will be back here. Let's shoot for a couple minutes before 1 o'clock. So we'll see everybody shortly for the second session, which will be resources for rural housing. So thank you so much. Welcome back to the second half of our summit here. I will be turning it over to Steve here in a minute to talk about a couple of our sponsors.
Thanks a lot, Rebecca. And big thanks to our first round with Seth and Mariah and Wally. Great job, everybody. And get a lot of good comments from people that are on board. We're well over 100 people attending today, which is great. And we want to thank our sponsors again for all their great support, the exhibitors as well, which we call Get Connected now. So thank you all for all your support. I'm glad to see all the people that are joining us, and we're looking forward to another hour of some great information with our next group, because we talk about resources for rural housing. But as you said, Rebecca, we want to talk a little bit about two more of our gold sponsors. We really appreciate their support, and we're going to hear just a short greeting from each of them. I'd like to introduce Kelly with WEC Energy Group. Kelly is the local and governmental affairs leader. And Kelly, great having you as a sponsor, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Steve. Some of you may better recognize us by the names of our utility, Wisconsin Public Service and We Energies. I want to thank you for just giving me an opportunity to visit with all of you briefly this afternoon. It's our honor to be one of the sponsors of the 2021 Wisconsin Rural Partners Virtual Summit, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of today's session. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kelly, and we do really appreciate your support. Having both your departments together under WC Energy Group means a lot to us, and I know you're very committed to what rural energy is going to be looking like, not only today but in the future. And we look forward to partnering with you and helping get the word out of all the great programs that the rural communities and the rural areas can use. So thank you again. The next person I'd like to introduce is from the Wisconsin SMP, and if you're wondering what SMP really stands for, it's the Wisconsin Senior Medicare Patrol Project Manager is our representative that's going to be greeting you now. So Ingrid, thank you for joining us.
Great, thanks so much for having us. And as Steve mentioned, we're the Wisconsin Senior Medicare Patrol. Certainly proud to be a sponsor of this event and involved with the Wisconsin Rural Partners. And our focus and connection with this organization is focused around healthcare as it relates to rural communities. The goal of our program is to provide education and resources to Medicare beneficiaries about how they can protect themselves from Medicare fraud, which is a pretty significant issue that impacts many people. So I will be happy to share our contact information and helpline information in the chat box. And if anyone has questions, we'd certainly love to answer those. But again, thank you so much for this opportunity, and enjoy the rest of the conference today.
Thank you, Ingrid. And Wisconsin SMP, along with GWAER, have always been big supporters of Wisconsin Rural Partners for quite a few years. So it's great that you can partner with us on our virtual summit. Just to let you know, Seth Hudson does get the award for the first presentation to be brought in, and I've actually got it up on the website already, so you can download his presentation. I know some of you were asking, so Seth, thanks for being the first one out of the gate with your presentation, but it's already up on the website on the May 5th page on our Rural Partners site. So we'll be adding any other presentations that we'll have as well. All the contact information of the speakers will be there, so you'll have a one-stop shop for that. And remind you too that our sponsors and our partners and also our exhibitors are all featured on our page. Their logos with a link directly to their websites. Like Ingrid said, if you need to get a hold of them, we've got multiple ways for you to contact all our great supporters that are part of the Wisconsin Rural Partners efforts with enhancing lifestyles here in the state, in the great state of Wisconsin. So Rebecca, you did such a great job the first hour. I'm going to let you do the second hour as well. So I'm going to give it back to you.
That sounds great. Thank you, Steve. And we'll be entering our second session here, resources for rural housing. So just a reminder, the full bios for our talented panelists today are on our website. So this panel includes Sridhar Ranabat, Manager of Commercial Lending at WIDA, Wisconsin Housing and Economic Development. We have Steve Deller, Professor and Community Development Specialist, and Kristen Runge, PhD, Communication Research Specialist. Both Kristen and Steve are with UW Division of Extension, and Ed White, Executive Director of Sauk County Development Corporation, will be discussing the resources for rural housing today. And again, as a reminder for those joining us, we will have the slides. If there are slides, we will be posting them on our website, and all of the panelists will be putting their contact information in the chat. So follow-up questions can be asked if we don't have time to address all of the questions in the chat. So with that, I will turn it over to Sridhar, who will be kicking off the second session for us.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Rebecca. I hope everybody can hear me. If you can give me a thumbs up, that's great. But yeah, I appreciate the opportunity for being here with you today to talk about WIDA and what we do and how we can help and be instrumental in financing aspect of some of the projects. So briefly, myself, I manage the commercial lending department currently. Have been with WIDA probably the most of my career. Time is spent with WIDA now 14 years on and off, and I've spent time in asset management, underwriting, and commercial lending. Basically houses two things among many things. The primary thing that we do is really the tax credit allocation of the credit to many low-income housing tax credit projects, as well as being the direct lender for these projects. And in that space, we do have the balance sheet funds, we leverage bonds, we have other funding sources that we can participate, or all in all, we have the ability and resources to really finance projects. And we define projects by, any project that has affordability feature, we get involved with. So that is a hard requirement. Otherwise, our capital tends to be a little bit more flexible and user-friendly. And especially when it comes to financing the projects that we have also allocated tax credit. So I will be talking about that a little bit as well. But if you were in the announcement with Governor last week, when the tax credit for this round 2021 was announced, you probably learned, significant pieces there. All in all, we allocated 35 million of tax credits, and it's the tax credit, 9% tax credit that's been around forever. That leverages about 60-70% of the total project cost. That's done on a competitive basis, so 1 to 3 or thereabouts competition overall, varies by set aside. So that was about 14.7 million was allocated there. Then we have, since 2018, we've started this state housing program. So what WIDA did was to pair up that state program. Essentially, we got like $42 million from the state. We said, okay, we're going to really roll it out as a program, tax credit program, to marry with the federal. There's another version of the federal credit, not the 9%, but it's called 4%. But we're going to just allocate these credits for those projects that are eligible for 4% credit, marry that up and tie it up to the additional resources of the state credit. So it's a hybrid of lesser 4% credit model and a more robust 9% credit. So if you add the state portion of the equity that goes into these projects, they know that all of a sudden, instead of funding more like 30% of the project cost, it would fund more, north of 50% or so of the project cost. So therefore, there is lesser need for other financing. So all of a sudden, the projects are more viable. We learned and we suspected and we learned quickly that, yeah, this is also a competitive program for us because the demand is more than the supply. Therefore, we are running it as the same allocation cycle under the 9% and 4%. So those two programs have been in tandem since last year, and it's really worked out well that we're going to probably continue down that path. So 7 million of state credit, 35 or 14 million, 14.7 of federal 9%. So the period of the federal credit that I mentioned, 4% credit, that also has to come with a federal credit. And luckily, normally, the state credit rate is the same as the published rate. Luckily, this year, the 4% credit, which used to be To give you an idea, December rate was 3.09. It became 4%, so it got fixed at 4. And therefore, there was more equity, and we were able to really take that 7 million and say to the developers that, okay, if you're getting more in federal credit, we're going to assume that the project is still viable. And I understand there's some other variable aspects to the development. The projects are still viable, so that we should be able to stress the 4% state credit further and give you the less per allocation. Therefore, we do get to more projects that way. So by doing that, we ended up getting about 7 more projects than we normally would have in the state side of it. So all in all, we funded 17 million on the of the 34 applicants on the 9%, and for 16 on the 4%. So that is 33 projects out of 54 applied. Much more success rate under the state program because of the reason that I just mentioned. But one of the things that I would like to highlight, which Governor also mentioned, is that these programs, all in all, the 13 million and 7 and excuse me, one moment, please. Get some water. Sorry about that. Something got stuck in my throat. So back. 35 million total credit. It really leveraged, about 275 million. We estimated to be that number. About that probably won't be exact, but of the equity amount generated by these credits, when you consider the amount of time, 10 years or 6 years that is given. In the case of state 6, the federal both credits, 10 years. And with that, there is other leveraging of other funding sources. And when we counted all those funding sources, all these allocations, 33 allocations, that's another 290 million. So over $500 million worth of activity just from this round, just from this announcement. So that's pretty tremendous. And so going back to the rural focus here, and what does it mean in terms of the credit program? So last year, we were pretty intentional in really modifying our QAP. We've had, the set aside for the rural program under 9% for a long time, and we recognize that there is a tremendous need, and projects are a lot more harder to do in rural areas. So with that, that theme continued. But last year, with the directive from the executive office and priorities, and governor's directive as well, we were very intentionally increasing the focus on the rural areas through the credit program. So we bumped that up under 9% program from 15 to 25%. And not only that, we also saw the opportunity on the state program. So we bumped that allocation, to really another 25% of the state credit allocation was also dedicated to the rural areas. And we published the rural qualified areas. And under the state program, we went one step further and said, okay, we're not going to stop just at the rural. Small urban communities also have need. So we're also going to create another set aside there. So, that was 20%. So 45% on, altogether almost half the credit on the state set aside is dedicated to the rural or small urban locations. We also recognized last year that 4% projects, and this was before the 4% got fixed at 4, which is essentially gave like 29% more equity ability from 3.09% to 4%, gave that encouragement to the projects to make it more viable. That just happened in December, but we didn't know that last year as we were creating the QAP, or even when we invited the applicants in December. So so before that, we knew that, you know, the projects were a lot harder to do. So we said, okay, we're going to make these rural projects, make it walk and talk like the normal 9%. So there's a lot more equity. So if you're in these areas, you have the ability based on your need to really request more credit. And the multiplier was like we came up with, you know, to come up with exactly like 9% credit program. It was 3.75% times. So therefore, you know, more credit went into the projects. You know, first we understand, you know, the rents are not as robust, and also the difficulty in construction costs, mobilizing, and as well as the scale of the project. You know, it's a lot less efficient to kind of produce on a per unit basis. So all those combined is going to make it a lot harder. So with that, we allowed for that multiplier. So we are, and you can see the result at WIDA.com, our website. All in all, we're pretty happy with the result. We had 11 applicants on the 9%, 5 of them got funded. On the rural side, not as much as we would have liked to get to in terms of the number of projects, but we funded 2, both small urban projects. 2 out of 2 got funded, but only 2 out of 5 under the rural side got funded, and that was perhaps partly because of the multiplier. So next year going in, what does it mean? You know, with the 4% being fixed at 4, we're going to recalculate that multiplier to see how much, if it needs that still, or how much of that is needed. So we should be able to, you know, get to more projects than we have under, you know, this year's allocation. And the other piece of it is, you know, WIDA is a financer too. So anytime there's a rural project, we're also very focused on, okay, do we have the ability to fund these projects and get to our financing in a lot more attractive way by, you know, different terms, perhaps, you know, better interest rate. All of those will be in consideration. WIDA does have a pool of soft funds available. Anytime we have a rural project, we will likely be more focused on looking at the soft fund possibility, you know, in more robustly. And those are the things that are happening. And this is also, you know, just doesn't stop here at lending and, you know, in the tax credit. It's a continued focus to really promote rural areas through economic development efforts and, you know, continued engagement. All of that is really priority at WIDA currently. So I will stop there and entertain any questions.
Thank you so much, Sridhar. Great explanation of the recent round of tax credits. I did put in the chat, we do have a recording of that announcement webinar on our website. So that link is on a chat. If you scroll down to the archived webinars, you'll be able to watch that to see kind of a map of where the awards were in this past round. So with that, if anyone has any questions for Sridhar, feel free to put those in the chat. And again, we'll make sure to put contact information as well too. And Sridhar, just kind of throwing out one of the questions we had in the last one, because it kind of relates to some of the tax credit program. Can you speak to the renewable energy included in different housing projects for self-sufficiency, lower energy costs, et cetera?
Yeah, so the energy efficiency, you know, there are 2 tracks that's going on. There's a hard requirement, and we have put it out in our QAP. The Green Built Energy Standard is a requirement to build to those standards. And there is also the inherent benefit in being efficient, you know, bringing the energy efficiency, whether, you know, I mean, that'll do a number of things, you know, and long term, you know, after these projects are built, the operational side of it is also very important. And it's very important for WIDA to really extend that benefit to the tenants as well. So you will see that in the rent and utility calculation. So by that factor involved, you know, developers are also very focused and naturally attracted to lowering the energy costs. So there is that piece as well. But you know, the design elements, the energy efficiency, there are some points available, as well as there's some threshold requirement that we look for on all tax credit projects, among a number of other things, that remains to be a high priority for WIDA.
Thank you so much. And another question, speaking of the smaller rural projects, let's say under 40 units or less, what are some ways that rural communities can engage and attract developers that have experience in housing tax credits from your perspective?
Yeah, the biggest thing is really to, continue to engage with us. We're happy to engage with any project or any proposition early on. Certainly it's a competitive program, so we are not able to advise to say, oh, where you could score and whatnot, but earlier on engagement, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. Does it fit into, these are the key questions that we have. Could you clarify, certain aspects of it? We're, again, always happy to do that. So that's one piece. The other piece is really collaborating with successful development team, and it's very hard for developers to kind of be focused on the rural areas because first of all, it's away from their probably home, or if that's not the case, then the economy of scale and it makes it harder to do. And if you can get one project, large project done, and it's a pre-driven, by way the program is designed, certainly there's incentive to drive the fee and be healthy that way on an organizational level. So if I had a choice to go to a rural area to do 40-unit project versus 100-unit in Madison, Milwaukee, of course I would choose the 100-unit option. But with WIDA's focus, setting aside more resources there in rural areas, that's tremendously powerful, I feel like, and we can continue to look at that further to see what else makes sense there. The other piece of it is really collaboration. If you're kind of small developer working to make these projects happen, WIDA does have the incentive to collaborate with different developers, especially when it comes to minority or emerging developers as well. So I would pay attention to that piece as well. But all in all, really engagement with us and continued collaboration outside of WIDA and the development community would be a great start as well.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Sridhar. Appreciate it. Our next panelist will be Kristen and Steve with UW Division of Extension. So take it away.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks very much. What you should be seeing on your screen right now is a PowerPoint presentation that is not quite in presentation mode. And I am Kristen Runge with UW Division of Extension. I'll be presenting along with Steve Deller. And we're going to talk today about our community-led housing market study, and a market profile would probably be more appropriate of a term after listening to Seth, and our community economic analysis. First off, our community-led housing market study got its origin back in 2017. We were approached by the village of Waunakee, which is a satellite suburb to Madison, Wisconsin. They had grown fairly rapidly over the last 20 years, adding this past decade alone 2,842 residents. This is a map of the region that Waunakee is in. We have two other pilot communities that are doing the study right now. Mount Horeb, they're in the lower left-hand corner. They've gained 440 residents over the last 10 years, and Portage, the city of Portage, which is up in the upper middle of the map, has gained 82. Portage and Lodi, Wisconsin have not had a lot of development in the last decade, a combination of both the recession and the lack of developer interest in the communities for some reasons that I'll go into if we have a longer period of time to talk about. But our background context for this is that Waunakee approached extension because along with this rapid growth came an increasing pressure in the community for housing. When supply is low and demand is high, of course, those who have more money are able to bid up prices. And we saw that reflected in rising median incomes in Wanakee, which at one point in time, about 25 years ago, would have considered itself a small farming community. It had about 5,000 residents in 1990 and is up to almost 15,000 now. So the prices, or the home prices and the median prices or median incomes, really accelerated over the last decade. And what they're seeing in the last couple of years in particularly is a really very rapid rise in prices that almost resembles a bubble, although I don't know if it would qualify as such right now. This is an example of a home that sold a couple months ago in Wanakee. It was priced and sold at $240,000 in 2005 and sold in April 1st of this year for $631,000. Any kind of rapid price rise, and this is really out of scale for almost every community, means that those who are in the community that are teachers, police officers, are essential workers, our everyday workers, are really finding affording a community to be a difficult task. So they approached Extension and asked us if we could help do a community-led housing market study process. And if you've ever worked with Extension before, you know we show up and ask everyone to roll up their sleeves. So this is the goal of the study over here in red was really to identify the gaps in housing. But while doing that, we also wanted to build the local capacity to address housing as a community issue. So this was as much an education process for leaders in the community as it is a product that we're going to deliver in the form of a study. The final report was designed to fulfill requirements for housing affordability studies, but then also give a strong profile of the community, where their need is and what we think the market would bear in terms of housing prices. It was a 7 to 9 month process, so it's a much longer process than hiring a consultant to do a marketing study or do a housing study as a deliverable product. Again, it's a research and capacity building program. It starts out with Extension coming in and negotiating the role with the community. The municipality in this case is the one that sponsors the committee, and for the housing market study, right now the real target is municipalities as opposed to regions or counties. So a lot of the recommendations are going to involve plan commission decisions, comp plan implications for it. So at the moment, these really should be sponsored by a municipality. Ideally, the folks on the committee are from the community, of course, but is the board chair or mayor involved, school district superintendent, because some of the decisions and recommendations are going to involve capacity at school districts and tax-based issues related to school districts. And if there's a municipal economic development director, a county economic development director that can serve as a resource, it's great to have them at the table. In addition to that, we ask for a representative committee of people from the community that's going to be affected. So this truly is a capacity building and education exercise. The municipal team works in conjunction with Extension. A specialist is typically assigned to this, and then an educator who is usually from the county or the region that does facilitation and serves as the local contact. The municipal administrator serves as the liaison to the board or council, and the ranking elected also serves in that role. And again, with Extension, you know, if you show up to one of our meetings, it's not a sit and listen affair. It is a roll up your hands, get your pencil out. We're going to learn a lot and we're going to do a lot of work. And so our meetings are very active. There's a lot of homework for this particular project that occurs outside of the actual meetings themselves. What does it look like when this is all done? Well, we have data that we look at and we package in 3 broad categories. The first category is really designed to build capacity among the local team, and we look at regional growth patterns, resident profiles, and how resident profiles have changed over the last 3 decades in a community. We look at the profile of commuters to the area and where are people that live in the community commuting to. So what does the in and outflow of commuting look like? We do a cost burdened household analysis and a public assistance profile to determine what is the local need for affordable housing or missing middle level housing. A lot of this information and this data feeds decisions at the municipal level. We're looking at housing stock inventory, housing starts over the past 10 to 20 years, and a gap. And then we have a third section of data that we look at. We do a community survey and we pull together as much information about the market and what the community supports as we can in order to make it easier for developers to come into the community, to reduce their costs of getting involved in the community. This is packaged in the form of an annotated report. And I'll put a link to this URL in the and also a set of recommendations. What it looked like, our first completed community was Wanakee. Both Mount Horeb and Portage are in the middle of this process right now. In Wanakee, the night that we presented the results to the board, Viridian, which is a developer in the Madison area, showed up with a copy of the report in our hand. They had watched videotape that we publicly broadcast of every meeting that we had and had designed a subdivision to the exact recommendations of the committee, which was pretty phenomenal and also completely unexpected. I went over there this morning. That was in 2018, July of 2018. They broke ground this past year. And as of this morning, this is what the subdivision looks like. It is a former farm that is immediately adjacent to Wanakee, the village, and they pay kind of tribute to that heritage and the design of the community. What our real goal was, though, as a task force was to fill affordable workforce housing. And the community was able to land through Cohen Esri, a project that was WIDA supported. And that was approved in April, and it should be breaking ground this summer. A couple of the other things that happened in the community is they shaped the way that they approach housing by creating a community development authority, which has been newly minted and is about 6 months into their process now. And they did, as Seth Hudson mentioned earlier today, adopt a TID and TIF policy where they extend financing to, they will extend TIF or TID for 1 year with a goal of extending financing to housing project. And in Wanakee, that takes the form, their TIFs and TIDs are almost exclusively PAYGO. So that takes the form of funneling dollars into that direction. Some of the lessons we learned, and this is one particular approach to housing, there are many other ways to approach it. Group formation was key. The buy-in from the municipality in each of the communities that we're working with seems to be key. This is the start of a long-term project. We did end up in Wanakee advising that they hire expertise in order to implement the recommendations. And we got some help from Nicole Solheim before she was in her current position, from Jason Valerius, who is a planner, and Brian Kleinmeyer, who is a municipal attorney that has helped form some of these projects and plans. And at its speediest, it's a 2-year timeline from proposed project to groundbreaking for at-scale projects. And with that, I am going to stop my share and I'll turn over our remaining time to Steve. And Steve, I might have run out the clock a little bit.
That is fine. I'm going to share my screen. Essentially, this is a website, and I will cut and paste the URL into the chat box. Not all rural communities in Wisconsin are in a position to undertake the type of program or the type of initiative that Christian just walked through. If you were to, I mean, the program that Christian kind of defined is almost like a Ferrari of types of programming. A lot of rural communities are not in a position to get behind the wheels of a Ferrari and drive it effectively. So we came up with what might be called more of a Volkswagen Beetle from the 1960s as an alternative. This is a program, we're calling it the Housing CEA, the Housing Community Economic Analysis. And this is really designed to kind of get communities a little, kind of tackling the problem proactively and kind of taking a chance to step back and think about it. Again, as Kristen's pointed out, if you have worked with Extension before, we really kind of take this as an educational program. We want to engage the community in a conversation about the housing issues that are around them. So what we've designed here is kind of a 3-step workshop, if you will, whereas Chris, I think the Wanakee, you had what, 12, 13, 14 meetings, if not more than that. So this is a much simpler program. And again, you end up with a team of 10, maybe 12 people, the traditional kind of leaders of the community, but also those hidden leaders. For example, we just conducted one of these in the Sauk Prairie area, and we had a minister on the team. We had a couple of bank mortgage loan officers on the team to kind of get a broader representation. The session is set up around 3 workshops. The workshops are about an hour and a half. And the first one is really to kind of give an overview of what does the data tell us. It's kind of a housing inventory, if you will. We talk about things like the percent of home ownership, the percent of rental markets, how many are multi-unit, how many are single family, just kind of that background information to kind of, confirm the perceptions that people may have or to challenge the perceptions that they may have. One of the things that we struggle with, however, is that we have fairly good data on fiscal stress. That's that kind of threshold of 35% or more of your income going to housing costs. Is if you're above that threshold, you're kind of housing stressed. What we don't have very good data on is the quality of the housing stock. And that's something that I haven't really heard talked about on the session today, is that a lot of communities are coming at this through kind of 2 lenses. One is that the housing is simply become too expensive, and the new supply that's coming online is simply too expensive, or the housing stock is not of very good quality. It's the type of housing stock, you may have a family that's looking at moving into the community, they look at the housing stock and they essentially say, this community is not for me. Now, the problem that we have with that is that we have such a high percent of recreational housing in the state of Wisconsin, it's difficult to separate out what is low quality housing stock as opposed to, no, that's a fishing cabin. So we struggle with that. So that's where we bring in a lot of local knowledge to kind of talk about those issues. The second session is we walk through what's called a housing preparedness index. This is a list of questions that are aimed at trying to get a range of strategies on the table, all the way from the low-hanging fruit geez, we already have programs in place. The county has programs, the state has programs, and we're not taking advantage of those. Let's start taking advantage of some of those. To the fairly complex, like a land trust that's taking place up in Door County. So the idea with the preparedness index is to simply lay out a range of possible strategies that communities can think about. One of the things that we want to try to emphasize through this is that there is no magic bullet. It's very difficult to simply have a community go out and convince the developer, come in and start building starter homes for us. That's really extremely difficult to do. And for a lot of rural communities, I would say impossible. So it's really looking at those types of things that communities can do, like for example, going from a 100-foot lot requirement down to a 60-foot frontage lot requirement. Perhaps having what's called a grandma buildings that are allowed. You can build the old carriage house. You can convert that into a grandma apartment. Allowing flexibility in zoning laws and land use laws and things like that. The third session is really aimed at trying to identify 3, 4, no more than 5 actual things that the community can tackle, specific actionable things that they can move forward on. The idea is to kind of get the community kind of comfortable with having some successes with some fairly simple steps. Once they start to build some success on these simple steps, they can start to move on to take on more complex types of strategies. So this is really aimed at working with communities that are towns or villages, if you will. It's really a way to help a community that's been struggling with housing issues. They're not sure how to get started. They're not sure what to do. It's a way to kind of, okay, let's go through this and see if we can come up with 4 specific actionable items and start to build some momentum. There is on this website here, a PowerPoint presentation that you can see down here that goes along with this seminar that we put on and recorded in place. There's also some examples down here of some of the different kind of housing profiles that we've put together. So I will cut and paste this into the chat box, and I will stop sharing my screen with that. So essentially, from an extension perspective, we have kind of 2 ways that we can go work with communities. One is kind of the simpler housing CEA to kind of build some momentum. The second is the community is more organized. They have more resources at their disposal, and they're able to tackle it much more substantially. I'll stop with that and see if there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Steve and Kristen, for the great information. And I see Kristen has already put the link in the chat, as well as contact information for follow-up questions. We do have just a quick minute here for a question. What does cost burdened household analysis actually mean? If you can take a minute to explain that.
Yeah, so we look at the number of owners and renters in the community, and there is an analysis that, we've done with Kurt Paulson a number of times, who is in the division of, or excuse me, urban and regional planning, and it looks at what proportion of a household income are they dedicating to housing. So if it's above the 30% mark, that is the guideline. We consider them cost burden, and that can be anybody from an owner to a renter. And closing that gap, particularly for renters, becomes one of the focus of the plans that we put together. A little harder to do that with homeowners, but we have some ways that we try to address that as well.
Another, and this is something that with the housing CEA, if this is something that they come out at the end and say, we want more information on kind of like the cost of housing. For example, you can look at the occupation structure of the occupations, the different number of jobs by occupation, the typical wages of those occupations, and then the type of housing that those folks should be able to enter into. And then you compare that to what is actually available. And that's where you see that disconnect. And that disconnect, and this is something that I think has been a real eye-opener for a lot of folks, is that in Wisconsin, the fiscal stress isn't so much with the homeowners, it's more with the rental market. And a lot of communities have kind of said, you know, geez, maybe we need to refocus our energy on looking at that rental market. And it's simply trying to broaden their perspective and move beyond simply, well, we need somebody to come in and build starter homes, single family starter homes on quarter-acre lots with white picket fences. I think that a lot of folks think that that's what we need more of that, and that's not necessarily what the market is driving.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kristen and Steve. I appreciate your time and your great presentation. So with that, we'll head into our last panelist of the day, Ed White with Sauk County Development Corporation. We'll turn it over to you, and make sure to stick around at the end of Ed's presentation. We'll just have a couple of notes from Wisconsin Rural Partners, and we'll just touch on our upcoming sessions that we have in the following weeks. So Ed, we'll have you start your presentation. And Ed, if you are speaking, we are not able to hear you.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
A little difficult getting back and forth here. I was asked to present kind of on lessons learned from a housing study we did in 2018. We did a county-wide housing study. So it involves 6 communities, and then it had a county-wide kind of section for all those who didn't participate, the rural areas and those kind of things. So it was your typical housing study, a lot of stuff that was talked about today. Seth had mentioned, outdated land use regulations, those kind of things. So we looked at those. We did surveys on what people were looking for, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, amenities, senior housing. We did focus groups. We did community meetings. So all the typical things that you should do, I think, in a housing study. Gathered the data. Ours was done by Beerbecker out of Reedsburg. And so, and then you gather all that stuff, you massage it a bit, and you make recommendations. Now, what we found out, and Kristen and Steve mentioned this to me at one point, that when they were working in Sauk City, Prairie du Sac, which were two of the communities that were involved here just this past year, they kind of noticed that, Sauk City and Prairie du Sac's studies were almost identical. Well, when you're in the same county, I think 80 to 90% of the recommendations, the things that you can do, the things you want to look at are going to be, pretty close to the same. But communities do have slight differences. So that's that other 10 to 20%. So if you did look through the whole thing, many of the suggestions, the recommendations were the same. What we learned was what sold us being the committee, Sauk County Development Corporation, and my board and my housing committee. We put this out for bids to the two local engineering firms. And what sold the committee was the matrix kind of at the end of the report, which was going to talk about the recommendation, how much was it going to cost, who's going to fund it, who's going to, do the actual work and that kind of thing, which sounded great, right? It sounded just what we want to do. We want this matrix. We want to be able to show people exactly what they need to do and who they could look for. Is it USDA? Is it WIDA? Is it somebody else? TIF. But what we ended up with, and this is exactly what we asked for, so I don't blame the engineer, the firm for this, but here's what we end up with. Okay, and there's 5 pages of this for each community. And so watch what you ask for, you just might get it. And so what you see here is obviously every kind of thing imaginable, and I know you can't read it. And that's one of the issues, right? But this broke down every sector, every section, what you could do. And this was, actually just one of the issues. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. So obviously it was too long. It was too complicated. The total study was over 400 pages, 200 in that being appendixes and surveys and things like that. So it's background information. And when you're doing 6 communities and the county, you can expect a long document. But the idea was each community did have their chapter. So you could take a 20 or 25 page report, chapter out of the book and use it. And although I think it was successful, because we have had communities use it when a developer approaches them for assistance, TIF or otherwise. We've had the community go back to the study, look at the types of housings the study said that their community needed. And if the development presented those or made those, we've had a couple of investments from Reedsburg and West Baraboo, and Baraboo who's looked at it. So at least 3 communities have used the study to kind of determine if they're going to contribute to the project. And of course, developers have been using it regularly, saying, give us money because your own study says this is what you need. So, it has been used. I don't want to say it wasn't used, but the lesson I learned, if I'd ever did one of these again, is that we need to get, Kristen talked about buy-in, from the community. And we had a lot of involvement, right, from our communities. We did these community focus groups, meetings, and we had a lot of involvement. But involvement is different than commitment. And what I think I would do differently is get commitment up front, because when we got to the end and I made presentations to each individual community, I go to the community, I go to the mayor or the village president. Oh, we're going to let the plan commission handle that, or we're going to let the CDA handle that, present it to the council. And so we had different communities asking us to present it to different groups, which may or may not have been involved in the process. And so you make the presentation, they see that list of 30 or 40 things to do, right? And part of my presentation was that we would come back and help them narrow that down to 3 to 5 items that they could get started on. Because we all know that you can't work on more than, you know, a few things at a time. And then we would progress through. To date, I have not had one community come back and say, yeah, we want you to come in and do that. And it's now 2 years later. So even though they've been using it, they're not using it, I think, to the fullest capacity, you know, that they could have gotten more out of it. So one is get commitment up front from each community, and these communities all help fund this. So they had a vested interest in, you know, seeing this thing succeed. So get commitment up front, you know, from whomever, and I'm talking commitment, not just that they're going to be involved, but they're actually going to do something with the study, including who's going to make decisions, you know, and on narrowing down those tasks, because you're always going to come up with more suggestions than I think anybody wants to handle at one time. So who's going to do that narrowing of tasks and assignments? And finally, who's going to be responsible for implementation? And that could be different tasks, right? Who's going to be implementing? That was one of the things in the matrix was, you know, if it's looking at your ordinances, that's obviously a plan commission and city council or village board decision. But where's it going to start? Is there going to be staff assigned to this? So, you know, communities that have staff, Reedsburg, Baraboo in our case, and you know, are they going to be assigned to helping with this process, or is it just going to die, you know, be put on the shelf and die? So it's going to be, that's pretty much what I have. Those are the biggest things. If you don't have, we had plenty of buy-in, right? I thought all through this process, we had good participation. We had, you know, 20 people at a meeting talking about housing needs and those kind of things. We already knew going in, right, that we needed housing. But as several of the presenters have talked about earlier, you don't get very far. I think Steve, Dr. Diller just mentioned that you don't get very far without some sort of a plan or a document that you can take to somebody, a developer. They're not going to do all the work themselves. They want at least a little base or a baseline that they can go off of, you know, to do the market analysis that Seth had talked about. But they need somewhere to start. And so, you know, ours was successful, but not as successful as it could have been. And those are my lessons learned.
Thank you so much, Ed. We do have a question about the cost of this study, if you could touch on that for a moment.
Well, this study was $42,000. And thankfully we had buy-in from the county as well. Sauk County funded half of the study, and then the 6 municipalities split up the rest, kind of based on population size, because there's going to be more work in larger communities. And so it was fully funded by those outside of, obviously, staff time from SEDC we did most of the community sessions, not the contractor. So
that sounds great. And then I think we have time for one more question here. So you had a list of 30 plus, you know, to-do items. If you had to shorten it, what would your top 5 items be?
Well, that would depend on the community, and that was the point. Was each of these communities had, you know, 30 to 50 kind of recommendations, and I think it's up to the community, and that's what I think Seth or one of the other presenters had talked about. Is this has to be, you know, your housing has to meet what the community expectations are. So it's not up to me to determine or to shorten it, but some of the key things are what most people have talked about today is ordinances. Right? Allowing more types of use, reducing that lot lines. That's almost in every community have larger lots than we should have as minimum lot sizes. One of the things we talked about a lot was the timeline. Kristen had talked about a 2-year timeline from kind of discovery to actually breaking ground. And that's not uncommon. So we talked with our communities a lot about, how long does it take? Somebody comes to you with a proposal, how long does it take for them to put a shovel in the ground? And every community said, oh, we're quick. We can get it done in 2 months. And that's not the reality in most cases. If it's a perfect project and everybody loves it, maybe 2 to 3 months, but typically that's not it, because I've been on the other side. I was a city council person for 14 years in 2 different communities. And you get all the way through the planning commission and you get to the council, you get to the second reading in the council, and one of the council members wants more information. So it waits another 2 weeks or a month because, the developer didn't have that information handy. How many left-handed screws are you going to use? So we know those things happen. And so being realistic about the timeline. But those are kind of the things that we found most often.
That sounds wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Ed, and thank you so much to our wonderful panelists for the day. We really appreciate your time and the expertise that you shared with us today. And once again, we do have the contact information is in the chat. I believe every speaker has put their email in that chat. We'll also be sharing any presentation slides from today on our website as well. So with that, I will turn it over to Steve with some closing comments. And thank you again for joining us for our first virtual summit. Thank you. And let's see if Steve is with us. Steve, if you're speaking, we can't hear you. Looks like you're on mute, Steve. Apologies, stick with us for 1 minute. One other point to mention is that Wisconsin Rural Partners recently submitted a survey out to our partners and community members, and we used a lot of feedback from that survey to kind of determine what sessions we'd be offering in this 5-part series. And housing was definitely one of the top rural issues that communities and partners were seeing. And then Steve will talk a minute here about the other sessions that we have. So again, we want to thank everybody that gave us feedback, which helped us in this session building.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I don't know. The gremlins kicked in, I guess. I don't know. So thanks for your patience. But anyway, I won't make this very long. You mentioned the survey. Yes, we did do a survey that helped us form these topics, but also we had a lot of people that are on this call that said they wanted to be part of our rural partners efforts in the future. So don't think we forgot about you. We will be reaching out to you, and also future partners and sponsors for other events that we want. But the survey did give us a lot of valuable information on what we're going to be doing in our upcoming sessions. So want to recognize as sponsors, Marshfield Clinic and Midstate Technical College, the Wisconsin SMP and WC Energy Group. Our silver sponsors included League of Wisconsin Municipalities, along with the CRA Network Wisconsin and Southwest ITBEC. Our bronze sponsors were GWD Professional Services, WCCU Credit Union, the Association of Wisconsin Regional Planning Commissions, and the All of Us Research Program. And then also the Get Connected. These were our exhibitors that normally would have booths, so make sure that you check out their sites as well for their services and resources for you. The Wisconsin Concrete Pipe Association, Serve Wisconsin, Lion Energy, Renew Wisconsin, the National Farm Medicine Center, Arts Wisconsin, UW Extension, and Save Your Town. And this is something that we're putting out for all of you, that you are going to have an opportunity to win one of these 2 books, thanks to one of our partners, Dan Smith, who's with the Cooperative Network. Daniel's written this book called Ancestral. It's going to be released in June, and he's been nice enough to donate 2 of these books, and he's going to autograph them. So 2 of our attendees at the end of the 5th session will be announcing those 2 winners, and they'll each get an autographed book from Daniel Smith's Ancestral. It's a great book involving the Midwest, and from poems to comments to feel-good stories. Daniel's got quite a book, and 2 people are going to be lucky enough to win that. Also, look at next week, a week from today, 12 till 2. We've got Deb Brown from Save Your Town that's going to be joining us. Deb was scheduled to be our keynote speaker for the summit if we would have had it in person in Marshfield, but she's going to be doing 2 of the 5 sessions, and this one will be coming up a week from today from 12 till 2, becoming an idea-friendly town. She's going to teach you the method about gathering your friends and those who think like you to talk about your big ideas for your community. This is one of those where you're really going to roll up your sleeves. She's going to challenge some of you. She's going to ask you some questions. So we're really looking forward to having Deb join us for the first of her 2 sessions coming up next Wednesday. On the 19th of May, we've got the broadband in your backyard, a very popular topic. And by the number of people that have registered, I know we'll have a lot of people at that one. Deb, of course, will be at the 4th one, talking about the community building in your small town. And then we wrap things up on June 2nd with the Rural Successes, which is our TRDI update. And remember, your top rural development initiative nominations have to be in by May 15th. So make sure you get those in as well. And we'll also hear updates from the Rural Wisconsin Initiative. That's going on out at the Capitol, along with an update with the Rural Prosperity Group with their new director, Marcy West. That'll be coming up in the upcoming weeks. So on behalf of the Rural Partners Board and everybody involved with Wisconsin Rural Partners, this was a great session. Thanks again to everybody who spoke, and thanks to everybody who attended. Go to the website at www.ruralpartners.org or wisconsinruralpartners.org, and we will have all the information from today's session. Make sure you spread the word, because people could still register. They can go online and get a registration for each of the 4 sessions that are left. And we'd love to have more people joining us. And we've got some great content coming up over the next month. So thanks again, everybody, for coming. Thank you for all you're doing for rural Wisconsin. And thanks for being part of Rural Partners Virtual Rural Summit.